All right. Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome back from your winter break into a new year. My name is Dory Cooper. I am noticing once again, this is last year's presentation. It says Morning School Garden Club. You may have gotten some mixed messages. We used to host this webinar in the morning at 7:30 and recently moved it to 3 o'clock. So I haven't properly updated everything. But welcome. Today we're going to, oopsies. Sorry, everybody. What happened there? Can you all give me just a response if you can hear me and see me, and if you saw that Canva presentation? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. That was weird. Just kind of froze and restarted. All right. Let's try again. I'll open back up into sharing my screen. Okay, thank you, Kim. Weird. Okay. One more time. So as I was saying, we'll be chatting today about some tips that I have practiced with starting seeds indoors and some really common mistakes that I've seen in classrooms so that hopefully you have a successful time starting seeds if you'd like to do that this year. So the main reason that most folks like to start seeds indoors are sort of two-part, and you might have your own intentions going into this or ideas of what may work. But typically, teachers enjoy doing this so that they can bring gardening into the classroom. So sort of this second bullet here tends to be the most common reason. It allows you to help students learn about to watch plants grow, learn life cycles, learn parts of the plant, and do it right there in your own classroom, which is really special and awesome. Another reason that folks like to start seeds indoors is kind of this last bullet point, to save money on transplants, but also to get your seeds started earlier so that you hopefully have a longer season with your plant. Now, you may notice down here, I said save money on transplants sometimes. What you'll learn as we go through this today is it's very easy to spend a lot of money on supplies for starting seeds indoors, but you don't have to. So I'll talk through the different things that folks use to start seeds indoors, and you can decide based on your budget what makes the most sense for you. But there are some other benefits to starting seeds indoors. It allows you to start your gardening a little bit earlier. So if you're interested in starting a farm to school program that's really connected to the classroom, this is a good way to practice it in the winter months when maybe you can't be outdoors. It's also a way to introduce the garden to students while you're inside before you take it outdoors. So this can be helpful to kind of introduce students to the concept of gardening before you're taking them outside to do it. There's also a lot that you can teach through starting seeds indoors. So you can really focus on the plant needs and observing life cycles. So I'll talk about that as well. And again, sorry, I was just opening the chat. Feel free to jump on the chat if there's anything you want to add, any questions that you have. I like this to be a space for both our experienced school gardeners and our beginner school gardeners. So please feel free to participate. Okay, so as I mentioned, these are, sorry, I'm moving some things around. These are two really like common lesson plan ideas for starting seeds in the classroom. Before we dive into the logistics of it, a really common thing that folks like to do is have a journal, an observation journal for their seeds that they're starting. So it can be as simple as, dividing a piece of paper into multiple squares for every day. You could do it every 5 days, like this one here. And this is a place for students to draw what they see, write what they see, and track the growth. I've seen people do this with rulers too, to measure how big the plant is, and that can be part of your tracking journal. You can keep it as open-ended or specific as you'd like it to be. And you can really tie that into any lesson that you're doing. Another more specific lesson plan is this idea of observation and hypothesis. So a science experiment using your seed starts. I've seen this this way here, but there's of course many ways that you could do it. In this version, you would have kind of 4 different plant sets that you're using. And it's very simple. You can do one where there's no soil, so maybe just the seed and water, one where you don't water it, one where the plant gets no sun, and one where the plant gets no air. That's common to put a plastic bag or something over it, or a container. And the idea is that your students will make a hypothesis, what's going to happen to this plant, and then observe it throughout a few weeks. And there's ways, again, that you could adapt this to a way that works better in your classroom, or that might make sense with your students. But those are 2 really common connections to the classroom. Okay. So the first question that I often get is, when should I start my seeds indoors? In my opinion here, so I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, so we're zone 7B, or some are saying we're now 8A. And that means we can start planting outdoors, typically end of February or March for our spring veggies, and then in April and May for our summer veggies. So usually I recommend starting seeds around February, mid to late February. And that would just depend on the type of plant that you're wanting to grow and how long it takes for it to grow. So the best way to figure that out is to use a planting calendar of some sort. So this is I think this is the Georgia Organics planting calendar that I kind of sliced up to put into this slide. But what this planting calendar does that I really like is it has different categories of when you should start your seeds. So right here, seeding in greenhouse. So we'd be looking for brown. So this recommends starting tomatoes indoors in March. It also has watermelon in March, but again, this is just the bottom half of the planting calendar. It's really common. We see a lot of folks starting tomatoes, basil, peppers, zinnias are really common seeds to start indoors for your summer garden. And you'll also learn as we go through this webinar and as you try this out yourself, there's certain plants that do a lot better starting versus direct sowing. So direct sow means you'll put it right in the ground. So I'll talk about that a little bit today too. Another way to find out what you should start and when is just the back of your seed packet. So it will often say, they're all a little bit different, but it'll usually say when to start it indoors, or how long it will take to grow indoors. So this one says it's a sweet pepper, so that's going to be a summer vegetable. It says to start it indoors 8 weeks before planting outdoors. Now, that might not mean very much to a beginner gardener. And so that's why it's helpful to use something like this, a planting calendar specific for your zone, to figure out when that will be. But it also says on here that we'll want to plant it in July and August. So that means we would want to start it 2 months before July. So that would be in May that we would be starting that plant. So it's helpful to not only utilize the planting calendar, which you can find online, and I'll share with everybody after this, but to also double check your seed packet, because sometimes different varieties have different length of time, different temperatures, different requirements. So that is really helpful to have it on, to double check the back of your seed packet. Okay, so now that you may have an idea of what seeds you're planning to start in your classroom, the other question is, what do I need? What equipment do I need? And there's a lot of different ways you can start seeds in the classroom. So I'll share a few. And then I'll open it up if anybody wants to share what they've tried. So the first, like, most obvious thing that we think about when we think about starting seeds in the classroom is using a grow light like this. So this is one of our partner schools, Cleveland Ave Elementary School, and this is their grow lab. So a lot of schools actually have these. There's often grants for grow lights, but you may just not know where yours is. It's possible that it's not in use, or it's in the back of someone's classroom or in a storage closet. This one, after the summer, I found it like completely taken apart and in a pile with other stuff that was moved when they cleaned it out, and no one knew where it was. And then I found it tucked away. So it might be helpful if you do want to seriously start some hardy seedlings in your classroom to ask around and ask if anybody knows if there's ever been a grow light system, where it might be. And then also keep an eye out for grants for grow lights. So with this system, this white part is the light bulbs. They're sort of like those fluorescent tube lights that fill up in here. And then on the side, there are these metal racks that allow the light to move up and down. And so then in here, the bottom part holds trays. So sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to find the proper equipment for this. You might not be able to find the trays that go with it, or you may not have any more of the cells that it came with. And that's totally okay. Because this light moves up and down, worst case scenario, you can just use plastic cups and stick it on top of a table here and move the light up and down. So if you're missing pieces to this, or you don't have any more of what it came with, don't fret. The most important part of this is having access to that light. And then this would just sit on a table. This doesn't need to be near the sun because it has that light. So you can really place this anywhere in your classroom. And then, of course, there's lower cost options, like I've mentioned. And I've used both of these systems. I've used the fancy grow light system, and then I've used egg cartons or plastic cups. So egg cartons is a great one because they're also compostable. The cartons will decompose. It's cool for students to be able to see the reduce, reuse, recycle concept in action. And in this case, what you do is you just put potting soil into each egg holder in the egg carton and a few seeds. In this picture, you can see they put about 6 in each hole. I usually recommend putting 2 seeds in each hole. And that's just because sometimes the seeds don't always germinate. Oftentimes seeds have about a 80 to 90% germination rate. So that means 1 out of 10 won't sprout. So I usually put 2 in there just in case, and then you can always clip it out later. It's a lot easier to trim back when it's just 2 as opposed to 5 or 6. Another option is something that we do often at the Wild Center. We make these milk jug greenhouses. And so this is something that you would store outside during the winter months, maybe outside your classroom door if you have a courtyard door, or out in the school garden. And this is a really simple concept as well. It's just an old milk, juice, or tea jug, and then it's cut in half, and tape is used to create kind of a cover that goes on and off. And then you just put some soil in there with your seeds, put the cover on, and let it grow in the cooler months outside, and the sun shines through the plastic, almost like a greenhouse. You may have also noticed in that first picture that I had these cells in there as well. This is for hydroponics. So a lot of the schools we work with also have hydroponic garden stations. Again, that's something that's fairly common with grants. And so for hydroponics, if you want to start those seeds in the classroom, it's the same concept, just a little bit different material. This is something called rock wool that you would use instead of soil. And so you just put your rock wool into some sort of cell that fits into your hydroponics with a seed, and you keep those really nice and watered. So it's the same concept. It sits under the grow light. Something that I wish I knew the first time I started seeds in the classroom was I bought really expensive seed starting soil online. It was probably like, honestly, it was probably like 5 times more expensive than just regular potting soil. And what I learned is I prefer to just use regular potting soil. So this is the brand that I like. This is Whitney Farms organic potting soil. You can use any potting soil that you'd like, preferably organic, but I usually look for gardening soil or potting soil. You just want to avoid kind of like an indoor potting soil that you'd use for, succulents or decorative plants. But if that's all you've got, that'll be fine. And the reason that I prefer a more everyday potting soil versus a seed starting mix is I just felt like for what I was using it for starting, about 100 seeds in the classroom for students to have that experience, it wasn't necessary that I was using the highest quality, nutrient dense seed starting soil that a greenhouse would use, that I knew most of those plants probably weren't going to make it anyway, and it was more for the experience. So unless you have a large budget for a project like this, I would recommend just kind of a standard potting soil. So once you've got your system set up, whether it's a grow light or whether it's plastic cups or egg cartons in the windowsill, I see 2 main challenges with keeping them happy. So of course they need sunlight, so it'll need to be in a window or under a grow light. Of course, in schools, often that sunlight can vary a lot. Certain classrooms get a lot of sun all day, and other classrooms get very little sunlight during the day. So of course, the more sunlight, the better. And it's usually recommended around 6 to 8 hours a day. That's kind of on the lower end. But if you don't get that in your classroom, if you feel like you're just getting 2 hours of sunlight a day, it is still worth trying. It's worth trying and seeing what happens. And then maybe that's an experiment or an observation that you realize with your students, hey, maybe we need to find a sunnier spot. And then maybe there's another spot in the school where you could do this. Maybe the media center, potentially a hallway or an annex. And that's a good project for the entire school to kind of be involved in too, because then they may see it. So sunlight is important. Sometimes also with the windowsill, I'll rotate the plants around a little bit, especially if it's an egg carton, switching sides so that it gets a little bit more well-rounded sunlight for the plants. But the big thing is watering consistently. So because these plants are in small cells of soil, they can absorb the water fairly quickly, especially as they start to mature. What you're looking for is soil that's always moist, but not soaking wet. So it usually, when starting seeds, you want to water them every day, but it's just a little bit of water. So the idea is a little bit of water consistently. And then as they get more mature, they'll need even more water every day. So that's I usually see either the seedlings are way too wet and then the seed rots and doesn't grow, or the plant rots, or they're way too dry because they're just being watered once a week or so. The other big mistake I see really often is the height of the grow light. So the first picture that I showed you, let me go back to that one. This is what I see really commonly as the height for the plants. This is fine to put it like this while you're putting the trays in and setting it up, but you want this grow light to be all the way down, just about an inch or 2 away from the soil or the top of the plant, the seedling. So you can kind of see it in this one a little bit better. It's just about, this one actually looks more like 2 or 4 inches above the top of the plant. So that grow light needs to be right down there. Otherwise, the plants will get what they call leggy. where they try to grow towards the light and they get really thin, they get scraggly, a little weak, not as strong. So what you'll do is you'll just start that grow light really, really low. You don't want it to touch because then it's too hot, but just right above it, and then raise it up as you need to as they grow. And then the other step that's pretty important is what we call potting up. And so what this means is you'll be taking your seed trays. You can see it in this center plastic tray. You'll take these cells of seedlings and transplant it into something bigger. So whether that's a pot like this or a plastic cup, something where the plant has more room to really spread its roots and grow. This is especially important with something like a tomato. That's really important to have a strong root system, but I recommend this with all of your seedlings. And I'll show you in a moment at what time when you should do that. But this step can be a little bit messy. You need more soil. It can take some time. So it's fairly often that folks will skip this step, but in order to have strong plants for your garden, if that's your intention of starting seeds in your classroom, I recommend this step. And plastic cups is totally an appropriate thing to use if that's what you need to do. So the way that you can tell when it's time to either up pot your seedling or get your seedling ready to plant in the ground is when you notice that its true leaves are showing. So typically you want 3 true leaves, and then that means it's time to transplant, to up pot or transplant. So a true leaf, this is something you start to really recognize the more that you do this. So every plant has what we call a seed leaf. So I think this example on the tomato is the best one to see. The seed leaf is this little round kind of baby leaf that's the first to sprout. So you'll notice when you're starting seeds, the first 2 leaves to come out of the ground, it looks very similar no matter what the plant is. It's these little ovular round leaves that pop out. And then the next leaves to grow are the true leaves, and they have a completely different shape. They represent the shape of what the leaves of that plant will most likely look like as it gets larger. And so that's when you can kind of start to identify like, oh, that's a tomato plant, that's a pepper plant. You can see those starting to grow. So once you get around 3 of those true leaves, then that means you can either up pot it or get it ready to plant in your garden. And again, each type of plant has a different rate at which this takes. So basil, for example, grows very quickly. You'll probably get to this point in a week or 2. Tomatoes, they can take longer. So it really, if you're on a timeline, make sure you're looking at how long it takes as well. All right, so once you've got those true leaves, maybe you've up potted your plants, maybe you haven't, and you want to plant those in your garden, there's one more step that I often see that can frustrate folks. It's really important to harden off your plants. It's very tempting to take your beautiful tomato seedling that you've up potted and put it right into your school garden, but pretty often this will lead to that plant dying, and then that's frustrating, and that's a big reason that I see teachers say, oh, I tried that last year, but they all died when we put them in the garden. That's most likely because they didn't harden off. So when you take your cozy little plant that's been inside under a grow light and just throw it outside into your school garden, it has to get used to the changes in temperature that it didn't have before, the light, the wind, the new soil, and that will often cause a plant to die. So hardening off is when you keep your plant in their cup. So you keep your tomato plant, for example, in that plastic cup that you up potted it into, and you just sit them outside in their containers for usually 2 days to a week. Similar if you buy plants from a greenhouse or a hardware store where they've been kind of in the greenhouse area, you want to do the same thing. You just want to take them home, put them by your garden for 2 days or so, so that they get a little more comfortable before you remove them from their pots where they've been cozy. So this one is tough because it requires a little bit of patience. And then you also want to remember to still water them while they're outside. So that can often be forgotten, is you put them outside to harden off and then you forget to water them and they dry out. And so once you've hardened them off for a few days, you can go ahead and plant. This picture is a little blurry, I'm sorry. But when you pull your plant out of its pot or whatever you're using, you should see some nice roots developed. It may not be quite as developed as this if you're starting them indoors, depending on how long it is. But you'll see these roots, and all you'll do is you'll squeeze it out of the container like this, and I usually loosen the roots, and then you'll dig a hole and put it right into your garden. It's usually recommended for most plants that you bury kind of up to, sometimes those seed leaves will still be on. Bury it up to the seed leaves or a leaf or two under the ground just to help create a more sturdy base and establish a stronger root system. But those are my main recommendations. And just to kind of circle back to that before I open it up is to review, you want to make sure that if you are using a grow light, to keep it really low so that it's barely above the plants. You want to water them just a little bit, but consistently. Make sure to up pot and harden off your plants. And then you should have better success with transplanting them into your garden. So I'd love to open it up to see if anyone has questions, or if you've done this in your classroom, what your experience has been, anything you've learned or suggestions that you may have.
Dory, hi, this is Kim Corson. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Hey, do you have recommendations for fertilizing, or when to fertilize, or should fertilizer be put into the ground when they're first transferred into the ground, or?
Good question. Yeah, so I think that's kind of a two-part question. So some people use fertilizers when they're starting seeds. So at the Wild Center in our greenhouse, we use kind of like a fish fertilizer and then some vitamins that we sprinkle on top. You can get really nerdy into the science of what fertilizers and additives are best for seed starting. But for me personally, when I'm starting seeds, I don't really do that. I keep it really simple. And I always start more seeds than I'll need. I forget to mention that. That's a big tip in case they don't make it. But once you go to plant it in your garden, I always like to put a scoop of compost in the bottom of the hole. So when you dig a hole for your plant, add a scoop of compost and then put your plant in there, and that'll help give it some food. Really the only additives that I use when school gardening is compost and dried leaves to kind of add a layer of mulch. So I definitely recommend compost when you're planting.
Oh, neat. Thank you for that advice. That sounds great.
Absolutely. Kimberly also asked if I know of any grants off the top of my head for grow lights. I'll have to look it up. I saw one was just released from a grow light company was doing, I think they were doing about 30 grow lights for schools that they were giving away. So I'll look into that. I'll see if I can Google it really quickly, and then I'll send it out to the group if I find it. But it is really common that they come from the companies that make them. So that's a good place to look as well. Sometimes too, I've had a lot of really good luck with reaching out directly to a company that has a gardening product that you'd like for your school. And they often have some kind of give back program. They often have donations that they'll just give to schools or small grant programs. So that's also a good way to try to secure one as well. Any other thoughts or questions? Well, as you all know, I love when you email me your updates on how these projects are going. So if you do start seeds in your classroom and you have a major failure or a major success, please feel free to share it with me. I'm also happy to, if you just want to send me a picture because something doesn't look right, I may be able to share any advice that I have. But my biggest advice with seed starting is it's always important to be emotionally prepared that they will not all make it. So you will have casualties because there's so many variables in this type of seed starting. I mean, so many things can go wrong. And then of course you're in a classroom with students who, may knock them over, may grab them. So I always recommend just start more than you'll need and try not to be too hard on yourself if it doesn't work out. Oh, interesting. Raina just sent a chat asking, can you talk about the different color spectrum on grow lights? I bought a grow light with a different color spectrum and I didn't know which one to use. I've actually never really experimented with the different spectrum. That's really interesting. I assume it must have a warmer light and a cooler light. I don't know. That's definitely something worth looking into. My instinct would be to use the cooler, the brighter white light, especially for the winter time. But the warmer light might have something to do with plants that maybe don't need as much direct sunlight. That's interesting. I'm sorry that I don't know, but I'll definitely look into it. Does anyone have any experience using different color spectrum lights? All of the grow lights that I've used have there were just the light bulbs. And that was all that was in it. Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. I'm glad to see you all here. Oh, Kimberly, good suggestion. That would be a fun classroom experiment. Absolutely. You could do some research, hypothesis, observation for sure. All right. Well, I hope you all have a great start of your school year. Welcome back. We have a few more webinars coming up each month. And if you have a suggestion of something you'd like to see, please let me know. I base these off of questions that teachers ask me commonly. So I'm happy to host a space for whatever you have going on and questions you have.